When your inner voice yells, "You're not going to die today," your body perks up. This is what is meant to happen. We as human beings have an innate ability, like all animals, to want to survive. We're going to get a little heavy here. There is no animal on the planet that commits suicide other than humans. No creature is born wanting to die. They all want to survive. Look at all those amazing, tiny, fragile babies in the ICU trying to live. No one wants to die. We don't arrive at that concept in our heads until we are older. It's when we start doubting ourselves, when that internal voice gives up. We only have the time in the present. And unfortunately, we are mortal creatures. And regardless of how much we don't want to think about our end, one day we'll draw our last breaths and cease to exist in our bodies. None of us can avoid that. You exist here and now, and your only option is survival.
On this episode of the Insomnicat Show, we're going to talk about our instinct to survive, whether just everyday challenges or even some of the most dangerous circumstances. We'll hear 3 stories of survival and explore the underlying theme that all of our guests felt important to discuss: fear. Being out in the extreme situations, such as shark attacks hanging off the edge of Mount Everest, or starving in negative 50-degree temperatures in Siberia, are extreme situations, but they reveal a lot about the human instinct to survive.
So, Nicolette, your survival instinct, is it fight or flight?
I don't know, dude. I'm just surviving. I'm just making it through life. I'm basically gripping at the earth, trying to survive.
Just hang on. I know. Sometimes I'm just like, the whole day has been a scramble. I'm just trying to make it to the end of the day. Like, that's what it feels
alive and keep other human alive. That's it. That is my one goal.
Yeah. I know for me, if I had to say, it is probably fight. Like mine, maybe that's why I train jiu-jitsu and enjoy things like that. But my instinct is probably to fight. Not to
unfortunately mine is too. I just don't do it quite calculated, especially in today's, it's different. We're not fighting bears today, right?
Right, so exactly.
And so you got to be kind of, elegant with your fight these days, and it's not, you can't just go out there and punch people, right? Or
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like in like real,
or with your words, or with your, I'm thinking of like extreme situations where I've felt threatened, not even physically, right? I don't know. Okay, one quick thing. Did you ever have a situation though where your instinct is to say things that are outrageous, right? Like your instinct is like, I want to fight back. Like people are saying things to me, I want to fight them back with your words, right? But you forget what you're going to say. And like, you kind of go back into your shell a little bit. And then later you're like, oh, I could have come up with all of this stuff.
Right. Because now you're rational, right? Now you're rational. You've thought about it a little bit. Yes. You processed it. Yeah.
Do you think that's flight?
No, I think what happens is in certain situations, people just freeze up, right? Even if their instinct is something, they freeze up. And honestly, for me, I think, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but preparedness, right? For situations. And I think what happens is when you're sort of not prepared, you're just going on whatever your instinct is.
Instinct is to fight, but it doesn't make sense. What
right, but it doesn't even exactly. And you're not really geared for that fight, because let's be honest, there's all different types of fights, even if they're just verbal jousting, right? There's different strategies, and people are very, very strategic. Like, it was Richard Comerford, right? A friend of ours, he always used to say to me, Brian, like when there's an argument going, you just get really quiet. Like, he's like, you just get really quiet and just let it process. And then you say whatever you're going to say at the end, and that's sort of how I am, because it's sort of like, okay, there's really, like, to me, there's no sense in arguing this, because it's just like a barrage, right? Like there's this barrage coming, and it's just, okay, let me weather the storm. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to imply, or I shouldn't say imply, I'm going to put my strategy in, now I'm going to be on the aggressive, so but I guess that's more of how my personality is.
Right.
So
I wish I could be like that. I wish I didn't just, kind of jump and like, what am I even saying? I'm just fighting for the sake of fighting, because that's my instinct, is just to fight no matter what it is. Right.
Well, I mean, I could tell a story. So once when my daughter Kira was learning to ride a bike, right? She was like probably like 4 or 5. I don't know how old you are, and we're riding around the corner from our house, and there's a stop sign like at the corner, and these are like, back side streets, right? And some guy blows the stop sign, like when we're at it. And I'm like, I'm just like, dude, there's kids around here, be careful. So the guy rolls down his window. And now this is like an old man, not like a young man. This is an old man. And he starts cursing at me right in front of my like 4-year-old daughter. I'm like, okay, whatever, buddy, just be careful, and he just keeps cursing, and then he speeds off. Right. So now, we have like half a block to go to get to our house. So we're, we ride the bikes to the house, and I pull up in front of my house. We pull up in front of the house, and I'm going to put the bikes in the garage, and all of a sudden this big pickup truck speeds up, right, and stops dead in front of my house. And I'm like, and this guy gets out, and he's big, and I'm, me, I'm not like a big guy, right? This dude had to be like 6'2", 6'3", probably like 240, like big jack, like dude. And he's like, you are cursing at my dad. I'm like, who the hell's your dad, first of all, right? So, and then I'm like, to my daughter, I'm like, first thing I'm like, Kira, go inside, right? I'm like, Kira, go inside, right? So she goes inside, and he starts going off. You were cursing. I'm like, dude, first of all, you weren't there. Your dad blew a stop sign, and your dad rolled down the window and was cursing at me. He's like, no, my dad. I'm like, dude, because I could see where this was going. Like, it was going to get into an altercation. And I just looked at him like dead in the eye. And I'm like, dude, you may kick my ass, but I promise you, I will break one of your arms or legs during this process, right? During this fight. And he just looks at me like dead, like just like steps back a little bit. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I'm Pete. I live around the corner. And then starts talking to me like a rational human being. And then we have the conversation of what happened. But his dad probably sped off or called him or whatever the case is. I was like, this guy was yelling and cursing at me, but his dad was the aggressor, in the whole thing. So he came. But my point is this, like, it's really processing the situation. And, I train, in jiu-jitsu, right? So like, I just sort of felt like, hey, if this guy may beat me up, he's a lot bigger than I am, but I knew, like, without a doubt, that during that process, I would hurt him, and he backed up, and then it was a rational conversation, and thank God it was avoided, because no one wants to really get into a fight. When you're an adult, like, fighting's pretty stupid, so.
The bones are more sensitive.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about flight or fight, right? And, I think we should define what that is, because, according to Harvard Health, oh my gosh, I had that Boston accent. Did you hear it? Harvard. All right. Harvard. That was an accident. According to Harvard Health Publishing, the flight or fight response evolved as a survival mechanism. So, we talk about this, and I think we all pretty much know this, right? Like, when the brain senses some danger, right, then it triggers that stress hormone. And then what is your, physiological response? It's either, hey, let me get the hell out of here, or let me fight the danger, right? So this was a way that we survived, in evolutionary way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and once again, I do think it's situational, right? Like, and I'm going to go back to the story of the guy pulling up. He pulled up in my front yard. Like, at some point, like, if you're being threatened in your home or on your space, right? Eventually you don't even have a choice. Like, how are you going to flee? Right? Would you flee into your house?
I'm sure some people could. Like, think about the cavemen. If they were like invaded by saber-toothed tigers, they had to get the hell out of that cave.
It's crazy, So I think, some of the situation that you're in, right, depends on whether your decision on whether you have to fight or you are going to flee.
And it's pretty powerful. I mean, like, that survival instinct, that is like the human drive to live. That's what that is. Like, do you want to live or do you want to die? Right.
What's interesting about any of those times in your life, right? It's almost like an outer body experience for most people. Like, you're sort of outside of yourself a little bit. You're not really, you're not, I don't want to say you're not present, because you are present. You're probably actually more present than you are in other times, right? But so it's sort of like an outer body experience. It's almost like you're soul sort of disconnected from your body and your body's just functioning. It is in its mode to do whatever it needs to do to survive. I guess that's that reptilian brain that everyone's always talking about, you know?
And we can thank evolution. So thank you, evolution, for helping us survive.
For keeping us there. Yep.
Neuroanatomy, sort of for fun. I always, that's why with my hand, you can think of when we were, prior to being primates and you know, we were evolving from animals and we were on all fours, our brains actually looked a lot like this, if you can see it in my video here. And then when we stood up, they flopped down. So the core stayed the same, right? Mother Nature is really smart and elegant. And so it just kept building the complexity of the nervous systems. And that's when you saw from the core, which would be your brain stem and your pons and your midbrain, then we started to actually build up higher levels of processing. And most people tend to think about the highest level as the cortex, the neocortex. And in humans, it would be the frontal lobes. So again, you know, when we talk about it, your executive functions are in your prefrontal cortex. And that would be what we would credit ourselves, I think, from giving ourselves what would be uniquely human. I think we have to actually have a humility check on that because, you know, funny enough, and it goes back to this little hand gesture I was doing, the two things that really gave us what we prize as uniquely human would be the unopposable thumb, because we could start manipulating our environment and building tools, which led to technology. And the second is actually language. So all, you know, animals we know communicate, but we built a language that we felt was special to us. But I think the reality is that also allows to the concept of evolution and survival, that we have to operate on different planes of existence. If, you know, if we share the same core brain structures as all animals need to survive, that's why you hear these concepts of flight or fight. And you know when you're under a chronic stress, your cortisol levels, like we're still root-based animals, right? So those are functions that affect us in the same way as any animal.
All right. So we know that we developed this survival instinct, you know, from evolution, thanks to evolution. But I mean, honestly, do you think everybody has that survival instinct?
I don't, honestly, or I shouldn't say they don't. I think some people have more of it than others, right? I think there's no one that like comes out of the womb and is like, I'm just going to lay here and go, right? You know, we're all born to survive. I mean, what's really interesting about survival is, or even just living, is human beings are like the only creature that really commits suicide, which is sort of crazy when you think about it, right? Like when you think about that, that's so everything is, once it's born, is designed to survive. Like that is the goal of pretty much every living thing, you know? So it's only when you get in your own head, you know, that starts falling apart a little bit. But here's the thing, and here's why I say I think everyone has it. I think some people have more of it than others. You know, like, you know, I always joke around, like, I'm one of those people, like I refer to myself as a survivor. Like I've had some really crappy things happen in my life, as most people have, right? And you have a choice. You either just stay there and lay down and succumb to it, right? Or you actually get up. You know, you get up, and, you know, that's part of being a survivor. But here's the thing that I think, this is where I think it gets very different, where you have some people who do have that more instinctually and some people that don't. But here's the thing. What are the tactics for those people who have less of a survival instinct? Because I believe there's like a tactical perspective to it, right? And I'm going to use the example, go back to the example of the story I was telling. You know, I actually felt comfortable if I got into that fight with that person because I train in jiu-jitsu. Right. So I knew I could handle myself. Right. So there is that experience in life that happens, and that practice and that technicality that happens over your life. Like you learn things, you learn how to handle yourself, you learn how to get through situations. You know, it's successes that builds that confidence. And what happens is, you know, so I believe that everyone's born with it, but some people need those other pieces to be as well adapted as some people maybe just come out naturally like that.
First of all, either you have the survival instinct or not. I've seen that throughout my life. If you end up in a situation, for example, which, let us say it's dangerous and you have to react to survive, either you have the instinct to survive or not. I've seen those who I thought would have it, who didn't have it when it came to the crunch.
Well, speaking of survival, and that's what we're talking about today, but speaking of, that instinct to stay alive, I think we should listen into the story of Belinda. Belinda was hanging off the edge of Mount Everest by like a twig, right?
She was like wedged in between snow and snow. I don't even remember. It was the crazy story.
So Belinda will be the first of the 3 survival stories that we're going to share with you today. And, we want you to listen to these events and really think about what causes each of these individuals to survive in these extreme circumstances.
Isn't this what life is about? Having these incredible experiences, sometimes near-death experiences, and learning from them. So I'll start off by preempting, some of the challenges that we had on our trip. And I want to take a step all the way back. So we went back to 2014. I've always had a dream about Mount Everest. I just didn't know how to go about that dream and how to go about having that experience. So we decided to take a group of people to Mount Everest Base Camp to see what it was all about, to experience life and to experience the challenges and all of the things that high altitude can bring. So we planned for many, many months. We fundraised for 3 phenomenal charities as well. We packed, we learned, we went through all the ups and downs of training for this big trip. Now, the trip was going incredibly well. So it was around October 2014. The weather was pretty good. It was phenomenal, in fact. It was a very clear sky. We'd been walking around the Mount Everest region for about this was, I think, the 5th day we were actually on the mountain. We were very close to sighting the top of one of the most beautiful mountains in the world. And both myself and Dr. Sue, a friend of mine, had just gone up ahead of people. We were just off chatting. There's a rule in mountaineering, and can I say to everybody listening to this, always go mountainside. Just hold on to that piece of feedback just momentarily until I go through the story. So remember that one lesson, always go mountainside. So we were chatting along, we were walking up quite a steep hill. At that point, we were around 4,500 meters, which is where altitude sickness can kick in, where you have the reduced oxygen, so hemoglobin levels in your body can suffer a little bit. And we were just chatting, having the most beautiful day. And the next thing we hear is a noise. A little bit of a noise, started to get louder and louder and louder. The noise was amplified because we were in a valley and the noise was bouncing off the surrounding mountains around us. And also it's eerily quiet in Everest. It's not packed as you see all the time on the television and on the media. Sometimes it's actually quite quiet in sections. So as we were walking up the hill, we heard the noise going louder and louder and louder. The next thing we did, we looked up and we saw a herd of yaks hurtling down the hill towards us. The yak herder was at the back of the herd of yaks, holding on to the tails to try and slow them down as they were heading towards us. By now, if you can imagine, there were 16 at that noise, and it grows louder and louder. The rhythm of it will always haunt me, that noise. As we looked up, it was too late. We'd come so far away from mountainside, we were actually now on the side of the mountain. Dr. Sue was in front of me, I was behind her. She was holding on to the horns of the yak. Now, these yaks can weigh anything up to 200 kilograms, and Dr. Sue is very slight. I was behind her, as in pushing back. Even with the weight of both of us, we couldn't remain on the hill. We had 2 options. We had the option to go back to mountainside, where we would have been crushed by the yaks, or we could go mountainside, however, off the mountainside, which was a sheer drop down. We didn't get the choice. it happened. Before we knew it, she could no longer hold onto the horns, which were about to pierce her, and we ended up tumbling down the side of the mountain. So bear in mind now, the yak herder is trying to control the yaks. Dr. Sue and I are on the side of the mountain. As we fell over and stumbled, my foot jammed against the top of the rocks, and I clung on to a shrub. Please don't ask me where this shrub came from, but the shrub basically saved our lives, and the fact that I'm left-handed and I have wider hips, because that's what Dr. Sue fell onto. Holding on for dear life with one hand, with the leg up in the air, Dr. Sue resting on me. There was a moment when the world stopped. It was like someone pressed pause. There was an eerie silence through the valley. I couldn't even hear the yaks anymore. I couldn't hear the noise of footsteps. You couldn't hear anything at all. There was just silence. I took a breath, and for that one moment, I looked down and I saw the sheer drop in the valley below me. Fear, adrenaline, all of those functions that we talk about when we talk about our response to fear kicked in. I looked down, I peered down only for a split second, and I uttered the words, "Today is not the day you're going to die." By now, the fear had started to drive us. We needed to be driven to what is the solution. We only have one way, which is down, or we need to get help to get back up again. Thankfully, we hadn't fallen too far. That's because we didn't have any ropes or rescue equipment on us, because it was supposed to be a walk. We were not expecting to fall off the side of the mountain. We had to very, very quickly think. If we'd moved the wrong way, we both had backpacks on as well. If we'd moved the wrong way, we would have slipped and we would have fallen and we would have died. There is absolutely no way we would have survived that fall. It was too steep, it was too rocky. So at that point, we decided, what can we do? After much fumbling, the yak herder must have come back. He was helping, reaching across and down for Dr. Sue. We couldn't get her up. So he had to take her backpack and then start to help her to get up the mountain. At that point, she was scrambling up, and eventually she was pulled up by him and she was in safety. Even now, as I talk about it, I breathe an incredible sigh of relief knowing that at least one of us was safe. Then the attention had to turn to me. The challenge that we had is that my foot was wedged. So basically, my body was here and my foot was here, wedged up against the hill. So they couldn't pull me upwards because my leg was outstretched, and I couldn't bend my leg because of how awkwardly I'd fallen. So again, they had to get my backpack off me. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my backpack off because the weight was wedging me against the side of rocks. If I'd moved to take my backpack off or to lift my backpack off, I would have fallen. So they came up with the idea of lifting me up the side of the mountain using my backpack. There are times in your life when you're grateful for what you have. And I was grateful that I was flexible, because having that level of flexibility allowed me to bend right the way up and be dragged to safety. And I have Dr. Sue and also the yak herder to thank for that. I'm only here today because of the tree shrub, and also for Dr. Sue and the yak herder that actually saved me off the side of the mountain. So I will always, always, always be indebted to them for basically for saving my life as well. So the moral of the tale, and going back to that point around being mountainside, if nothing else, if you ever go to a mountain, have the yak bell, which, by the way, this is the yak bell, which is engraved with the yak attack, Everest 2014, Dr. Sue and Belinda. So if you ever hear the beautiful sound of yak bells, move mountain side. And that's the story, our survival story of how we lived in the face of danger, being pushed off a mountain by 16 yaks, weighing about 200 kilograms.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have no desire to climb Mount Everest, but I really don't now. I mean,
yeah, you know, it's funny. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to do that. Like it was sort of on the bucket list. And then I went, I don't like the cold, you know? so I don't know how I would do. Like, I mean, like, yeah, you know, like it's pretty cold. So I don't know. Knowing me, I would be driven to do it, but like just like the thought of being out in the cold for so long is not appealing to me.
I was not expecting the yak. I got to be honest.
No.
I knew like that I knew a bit about the story before we spoke to her, but the yak, I was like, really? The yak? Or, you know, and all I could think about was like Lion King and like the herd of.
Right. Yeah. That's what it was like, right. You know, that's what it was like. It was like, you know, this crazy, you know, stampede. Like, think about that. And think about all the craziness in life that you prepared to climb the highest point in the world, and all of a sudden there's a yak stampede and almost killed you. Like think about unexpected stuff that comes up, right? That where your survival instinct needs to kick in. Yeah, you didn't really expect some yaks to come, you know, charging you. I mean, it's crazy. But think about what her instincts were. You know, it's crazy, and you know, I'm just so happy she is here to share her journey with us.
All right, and if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear the next story. Poor Shannon. I mean, and what's really crazy, I'm gonna spoiler alert here, he still swims and surfs with sharks. So listen to this one. You shouldn't be captive to your fears. Let's be honest. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too, which is going to be fun. But yeah, listen to Shannon's story. He's got a wild story off the coast of South Africa.
I'm from South Africa, and I grew up in a city called East London, which is on the east coast of South Africa. And I started surfing when I was 13 years old. My dad got myself and my brother to surf together. And that area where we surfed has a reputation for a lot of shark sightings and also shark attacks. And the place that I was attacked at that stage had the most fatal shark attacks in the world. It's called Nahoon Reef. So I was surfing with my brother, one of my best friends, and my brother had some friends with him as well. And I think there were some other people in the water from out of town or from overseas. So there were like 15 people or so in the lineup. And I had surfed for about an hour and a half. The day was spectacular. There were blue skies, no clouds. It was sunny. It was a winter's day, so it was quite warm for winter, and crystal clear blue water, no wind at all. And so everything was kind of nice. The waves were good too, and there were good vibes in the water. But about an hour and a half into my surf, some people got out the water, and I only heard this later on, but one person had seen 1 or 2 sharks in the water and got out and never told anyone. And the reason why was because he smoked some weed before he surfed and thought he was hallucinating. So he just decided to get out. And then some other people got out as well shortly afterwards because they kind of sensed an uncomfortable feeling. You know, in South Africa, we have the Sardine Run, which is usually between the months of June, July, and August. And the sardine swim up the coast from Cape Town towards Durban. And obviously bigger fish follow them, and then the sharks follow those big fish as well. So during those months, there are a lot more birds diving and a lot more activity in the water, and you have all this feeding frenzy. So sometimes you see dolphins, whales, fish, sharks in like a certain area. Anyway, so this wasn't happening that day, but you smelled like a fishy smell, as if there was one of these feeding frenzies there. So some guys got out early because I just felt uncomfortable there. I never felt that. I felt very comfortable and I was enjoying my surf, so I just kept on going. And my brother got out as well because he felt kind of uncomfortable. And I remember paddling for a wave. And while I was paddling for this wave, I just had my eyes and my mind focused on the wave, and I was looking down the line on the wave to see what I was going to do and how I was going to surf it. And as I was like about to stand up, this shark came from my left side and it bumped me into the air grabbed my surfboard, bit my hand in my surfboard, and dragged me underwater with it. And it happened so quickly, so I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I never saw the shark coming for me, and I never felt any pain either when the shark grabbed my hand and pulled me under. And everything seemed just to slow down, and everything seemed to just like go into this state of or of like a dream state. And fortunately, the shark that got me kind of, although it bit me, it kind of saved me, because the shark on my right side was going for my head and my shoulders. So that shark missed me. And I think if it did get me, it would have been horrific. I wouldn't be here. So yeah, the first shark got me and pulled me underneath the water. And I remember when it let go of me, it just stopped and stared at me face to face, eye to eye, like super close, right in front of me. And I just stared back at the shark, and we had this little moment. It was kind of cool, but at the same time, I thought I was dreaming. So we just like had this stare off for a few moments, and its mouth was wide open. I could see all of its teeth as well, and my hand was like kind of like right there or pretty close to its mouth. And then it swam away and went around me and kind of like shoved me from behind, and then that caused me to swim to the surface of the water. When I got to the surface, I saw my surfboard lying in front of me and all the other surfers paddling frantically towards the beach trying to get out. And they were all catching the last 1 or 2 waves that came in with the set. And I was so confused, because one moment I was paddling for a wave, and the next moment I was lying next to my surfboard and everyone's getting out the water. So I was like, okay, what happened? And as I grabbed my surfboard and I pulled my hand over to start paddling, I saw my fingers hanging off my hand and a big bite in my hand as well, and to my wrist bone. And that's when I realized that what I thought was a dream was reality. And that's when I started panicking and freaking out and honestly thought I was going to die. So yeah, you know, it happened so quickly, and obviously the adrenaline kicked in, and that helped me just to be very calm in the moment and to feel no pain. But the moment I realized what was happening, that's when I just, I started panicking so much, and my heart just started beating out of my chest, and I started shaking and like crying. And I just remember like everyone heading straight towards the beach on the last wave, and I was left about 100 meters all by myself out at sea with no waves. The ocean went dead flat, and so I remember paddling, just looking over my shoulders, waiting for the sharks to come back for me and expecting them to come back. And my fingers were hanging off, so like every time I took a stroke, I felt my fingers like about to fall off, and all the water just like flow through my bones and my tendons and ligaments. It was quite a gruesome feeling. And fortunately, after paddling for a while, I just like started praying. I was like, God, please keep me safe and get me out the water safely, you know, because I had no idea what to do. And I knew that if the sharks did come back for me, I couldn't fight them off me. So I just prayed, and all of a sudden my fear just disappeared, and this wave popped out of nowhere, and I just managed to catch the wave, and I kind of belly boarded the wave all the way to the rocks or to the shore. And that's when the rest of the surfers accompanied me and tied a leg rope around my arm to slow down the bleeding, and someone put a towel around my hand, and then my brother rushed me to the hospital.
We also spoke to professional survivalist, and he talked about, look, he had tons of wild experiences, right? This is just one story, because he's been doing this for like 30 years, right? Yeah. So he had a lot of stuff that he could have shared, but you know, one of the extreme situations that, I mean, we thought was crazy, you know, he was starving in Siberia, and then there was the bear. He was face to face with the bear. Oh my God.
Had to fight a bear.
Oh my goodness. So listen into this story. This one's wild.
Right. And this is to Nicolette's point, this is a professional survivalist adventurer, you know, so there are people that actually go out and choose to do this for, I don't know, I don't want to say, well, I guess a living, right? But, you know, go to choose to put themselves in these like really harsh situations.
Of course, I've had many, should we say, calls with death, and there's so many reasons who come in that you survive. If I take, for example, Siberia, I spent a year there together with a guy called named Johan Ivarsson, he was just 19 at the time, and we spent a year there traveling through, I would say, 8 months of the year when it's below minus 50 degrees. And we had down to, if we do Fahrenheit, down to 77 minus Fahrenheit. No heating, nothing, so we just slept every single night. Was a question about survival. Every day. One little mistake, you would lose your fingers, your nose tip, or your ears. And the situation is there all the time. One little mistake and that's it. It didn't happen on this trip. But then it's more actual situations, like when we were very hungry after a month and suddenly a bear turned up. We were in a canoe at the time, turned up like 300 meters away from us. And of course we lived like the Siberians, so we fished and hunt. And I shot 5 times against the bear and at least 3 hits. We were so hungry. So we paddled up to the beach, got off the boat, and we saw the bear. Beautiful bear. He was huge, and his arms, his rams were grey with age. So he had survived for many years, the most clever of them all, and he had no idea we were coming since we shot from the canoe. And we knew by training that we had to wait maybe up to 2 hours before we pursue the bear or the prey, whatever prey it is when you hunt. But we were so hungry, and we just needed food, so we didn't have the patience, so we went after the bear immediately, ran up this steep bank into the forest, or the taiga as it's called over there. And just as we were going to enter into the forest, we suddenly stopped and realized we have to slow down a bit. And while standing there, both of us felt something is not right. And we turned around, and you had this huge bear behind us there standing looking at us. And at this stage, just to show you this survival instinct, at times it just doesn't work. So this bear, he stood up on his back legs, threw up his arms like this, and then you could see he was sniffing like this. They don't have the best of eyesight, bears, so he was trying with his smell to locate where we were. And suddenly he realized where we were, went down on all 4, shot up his butt, and we knew he's going to come. And at that stage, I just couldn't get my arms up and shoot. I was in shock, tired and in shock, but I realized, something has to be done. So I just looked at Johan, 19 years old, but he's been hunted since he could walk. And I said, Johan, maybe you should give this a try. So I gave him the rifle. He took it, ran towards the bear who was coming toward us, shot the bear in his chest, and I remember it was such a huge moment because, like a human being, he showed that he had been hit. And we were hungry, as I said, but the bear fell down this steep river bank, rolled into the river, which had such a hard current at the moment, and before we could do anything, he went down and we lost him. So that was one of these moments where you need a bit of luck and somebody with you who can handle the situation just by pure instinct. obviously that it's a longer story to this, but I'll keep it short there. And a lot of our luck there, because up until then, all our hunting and fishing has been really poor. And we were suffering within reason. And we realized, you know, shooting this beautiful bear and not being able to take care of it, we have to look at life differently. So we completely changed our outlook of life there. And we realized we have to look upon ourselves as we are part of the bigger picture, in this case, the Siberian nature and wilderness.
All right, so you will never find me in the Siberian wilderness. I will tell you right now, that's not where I'll be. But, you know, I mean, there were some other stories.
Cold.
Yeah, no. Again, with the cold, what is up with this? Why does everybody like to go extreme cold? Except Shannon. Shannon was in the ocean. That's where I would get attacked.
Yeah, but you know, you wouldn't want the other either, like being in the extreme desert heat of like 120 degrees either. So
no.
You know.
So all of these stories kind of left us thinking, what does it really take to survive? So Brian, do you think there are differences then between surviving, you know, everyday life? Obviously there's, you know, surviving in the wilderness, like versus surviving in an extreme situation versus, you know, just kind of trying to survive everyday life, right? There's different levels of survival. Right.
Yeah, I agree. But, you know, I think to me, the thing that is important here is the mental fortitude, you know, and I think that's where a lot of people fail in both, whether it's extreme situations or it's, you know, even in life, right? And I know I've said this to you a million times, like you always need to look at improving your situation, even if it's just a little bit, right? You know, like it doesn't matter if you're taking one step, that's better than no steps, you know? And that's really like keeping your mental fortitude correct, you know? And if you don't have the mental fortitude or a positive attitude towards your situation, it gets really hard to survive or want to survive, right? And that's in extreme situations. And that's also even in your daily life. I mean, you know, like people like me, I like to laugh at things, even, you know, like sometimes it's just the situation, it's hard. And, you know, sometimes you just got to sort of laugh at it, right? Or make a joke about it. And I'm not saying like getting your arm bit off by a shark or anything like that, like joke about that. But, you know, some like your daily life, like sometimes shit happens and, you know, you need to sort of just laugh about it, because if you let everything get under your skin, you know, it's really going to damage your mental fortitude. So I personally believe so much of it is your attitude, your mental fortitude, and the attitude you're going in and you're looking at it with. And, you know, we all of us have crappy situations at some point in our life. It's just the way life works, right? And, you know, you need to survive those things. And if you're not looking at like the steps you need to take or taking a step forward on that, right, then you're gonna cave in. You're gonna give in to that piece.
You know, and I think about the role that having a full life must play in your will to survive, right? And I'm thinking about Shannon, and for Shannon, he was just 15 years old when he was in this situation, you know, and I think about, you have all this life left to live, right? Or, you know, think about your day-to-day, you have kids, we have young children, right? Like I remember my dad was in the hospital and he had, I don't know, some surgery. He's in the hospital all the time, so I can't keep up. But at one time, they had accidentally overdosed him in the hospital. They came in, they gave him pain medication. They came back, they gave him more pain medication. Nobody was there. And he just started to kind of like drop rapidly, and everybody rushes in. And the first, like, as they like, I don't know what they do when you overdose in the hospital, but however he came out of it, he screamed out. My grandmother had been there finally at the time. He screamed out, I have daughters, I can't die, right? I mean, so think about like what keeps someone alive. And for me, I know, you know, I say it all the time, I guess I can't die, you know, I got a kid who needs me, you know, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm going to fight till the bitter end. So how do you think the things that you have in your life play a role in that survival?
It could boil down to whether people have something to live for. I mean, if you have a good family, or if you have good friends, or if you have a good life where you are happy with what you do, or if you have, let's say, dreams and hopes that you still want to do and things you want to accomplish in life. I think that you tend to hold on to those things when you're in a near-death experience or a life-threatening experience. But I think if you had no hope, or if you had no love, or if you had no purpose, or felt like you had no purpose, then you might tend to lose hope. But I also think it's just in human nature to fight in certain situations, and obviously the adrenaline helps as well, because if it wasn't for that, maybe I would have given up too.
You know, I think it's, you know, I think that's a really good point. It's things to, you know, if you have things to look forward to too, right? And, you know, there's different levels of that. There are people who, whatever, like your dad who had a medical issue, right? There are people who are like, I want to live to see my, you know, kids grow up. I mean, I'll tell you a story. My grandfather quit smoking when he was 70 and he lived to 102. But I mean, what's crazy is I remember being like a little kid, like I was a little kid, and my cousin was, you know, just born, he's maybe like a few months old. I remember sitting with my grandfather on the couch, and he had my cousin, and he's like, I'm going to quit smoking, Brian. And I'm like, okay, you know, whatever. I didn't even know what the hell really it meant, probably. And he's like, because I want to live to see John, who's my cousin, get married. And I was like, okay, you know, and he did, you know, but, or I don't know if he said get married, but he said grow up, probably not get married, but I don't think he said get married, but I think grow up or something, right? Grow up and get married or some phrase like that. And he did, you know, he lived another, you know, 32 years, you know, but what's crazy is, you know, some people is that they have family, right? They have that, but there are people, you know, I have a friend who was, you know, suicidal for a long time. Yeah. And I remember him telling me once, the only reason he didn't commit suicide was because he wanted to see the sequel to a movie. Oh my God. And as crazy as that sounds, that got him to the point where he could be okay. Right. You know, where he could be okay. So think about that. Something as simple as wanting to see a sequel to a movie kept someone alive from not, like, you know, taking their own life, which is crazy. So I think it could be, to my point, it doesn't need to be big things. Like, that's why I would say, like, you know, if someone, you know, like you see someone, they're sad, smile at them. You know, like if they look sad. I remember one time I was driving and I was at a stoplight and I just look over and there's a lady next to me and she's hysterical crying. And I just turned around and I'm like, you know, I turned my lips up and showed her a smile, and she smiled. And then she said, thank you. You know, because people are just having bad days sometimes, and you just don't know how those actions can help people. And think about the role that plays in causing someone to give up, like someone who really feels that they have nothing to live for. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many people out there, you know, who probably feel that way. You know, just be kind people. When we think about survival, we think about fighting, we think about flight. And what's crazy is what we forget is this concept of fear. And I mean, what's crazy is that each of these three people that you just heard from, each of them on their own, unprompted, brought up fear after they told their story, and they each had their own take on it. But, you know, I think it's important to talk about fear, because just because we're fighting to survive doesn't mean that we're not afraid. Yeah. Well, I think sometimes, you know, fear in those situations, right, especially extreme situations, fear becomes your friend. You know, fear sometimes is the things that will actually push you to fight harder or to, you know, find a way to survive, right? You know, when you're afraid, it turns you into that instinctual animal, right? And honestly, a lot of times, you know, in some certain situation, that's what you need to survive, especially like these people's stories. Well, I mean, think about let's bring up evolution again, right? Talk about pain. I was just telling my son this morning when he had a headache and he had banged his head, and I said to him, listen, if there's pain that's consistent, that's there for a reason, right? Pain it's there to teach you or to tell you, hey, something's wrong here, you know, come check it out. Fear does the same thing, right? Yeah, I mean, a healthy fear, that's what kept us safe through evolution, right? I mean, absolutely. If you're afraid, you're not just going to jump off the cliff because you're like, what might happen? That seems scary. Let's not do that. You know, I mean,
fear kept us alive all these years.
Yeah, well, I agree. But there's also the people who professional survivalist, right? Or adventurist. Like some of those people, they embrace fear, and I'll tell you like a story when I was a kid, and this is how dumb I was because I was a really curious kid, right? I was like so curious about certain things. I remember my parents telling me like the stove, like it's hot when it's on, right? And you have like it was like an electric stove, so it had that ring, it wasn't like they wouldn't have those flat glass top ones when we were kids. And I was like, I don't see any fire. And I remember sticking my hand on the thing, and I had like a burn mark, like the burn ring mark on the palm of my hand for like probably like 2 years before it like faded out. But I was dumb enough because I didn't really believe what they were telling me because I couldn't see fire, but I was little, and so I was very inquisitive, I was very curious and like I said, stupid, where, I didn't have like that fear wasn't there because it was unknown. Right. So, and then obviously then I was like, oh, I don't do that again, but what happens is to your point with pain, I think people like pushing themselves even when they're afraid to find what their limit is. And what's their extreme limit, especially people who do this for a living, especially people who go on like these crazy adventures and these survivalists, and people go like, I'm going to go live in the woods for, 5 years and I'm just going to bring a hammer, you know what I mean? Or whatever, or a knife, right? You have these people some people like to push themselves.
But let's remember also that even a professional survivalist is afraid, right? And who kind of poo-poos the fact that if you say you're not afraid, that's bullshit. Yeah.
I'm scared all the time, to tell you the truth, and I've never understood these people who say they feel no fear, and I believe that is just complete hogwash. Honestly, I'm scared a lot on this trip. Now I have 2 daughters. I have one daughter, Eva, who doesn't seem to be scared of a lot of things. And then I have Dana, who's like me. We are scared of the dark. And if we see a film before we go to bed or something, especially if we are in the tent, we are scared. We don't sleep. However, I've learned to live with it. It's just fear, and it's fear of your mind most of the time. So nothing actually happens. And I've had animals outside, I've had elephants, I've had lions, but things went well. So you kind of live with it. And there's a lot of advantages with feeling fear because you're on your toes all the time. So fear is kind of part of life. Everything from meeting new people, you have fear. How are they going to react to me? To, when you end up in front of a tiger or something like that, how do I deal with these things? But then you also get this adrenaline kick, which just turns up. And afterwards, if you survive, that is so far so good. You just want that more and more. And then you find other ways to deal with it. But yes, I'm scared a lot. I feel a lot of fear on my trips. I feel a lot of fear. That's part of my way how I am as a documentary filmmaker and everything as an artist. You need this ability to dream and make things up which might not be true. And there's a lot of, I woke up last night after watching Jack Ryan, some series on Amazon here, and it was so thrilling. So I woke up and felt I was so scared. And it took me a fair while until I realized I'm not part of that film. I'm back in bed. So this is, yes, of course you need to feel fear. If you didn't feel it, you wouldn't have all your senses working. So there might be folks who say they don't feel any fear, and this is just some complete hogwash. Or they are dead today.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess my point is some people, I think, thrive off the fear. You know what I've seen? They get like that rise out of being a little bit afraid to see if they could conquer whatever that fear is. And I believe you should conquer your fears. You should, just like Shannon, he was bit by a shark and he went back and went swimming.
Yeah, I think you have a good point over there. It's almost like been there, done that, or once you've ridden a horse for the first time, the next time is a bit easier, or for those people who have surfed, like once you've caught a few waves, you get the feeling of what it's like and you know what to expect. So it does eliminate some fear, of course. And but I also think it's like a muscle, you know, like when you go to gym, you train your physical muscles and you do it in a workout. It's the same with fear or with many other things. Like you have to train your mind or train your heart to develop some kind of spiritual or mental or emotional muscle. It's not just a physical muscle that you have to focus on. So I think that fear is the same thing, because everyone has some kind of fear. I still have fears, but it's good to be able to face them and to go to like a mental gym and to train yourself until those things are manageable, or you can conquer them and overcome them, you know?
That is my favorite story, because I was really like, dude, you still surf? Like, I don't know. That for me, and I don't know, because I've never been attacked by a shark, but I don't know if I would have that in me to go back. Like once I've now been attacked by, I'm done. Like I don't want to get attacked.
I think you gotta, you know, I mean, here's the thing, you know, he's a surfer, right? So let's start with that. Okay. So he's a surfer. What do surfers do? They surf, right? In his heart, who he is as a person, he's a surfer. And like anyone who does anything, like any type of sport, right? There's always a risk, you know, there's a risk you're going to get hurt. There's a risk you're going to, you know, whatever. I mean, we see this all the time in jiu-jitsu. People in it, you know, even just training, you know, get hurt, right? You know, there's a risk associated with it, but because it's who you are and what you do, you sort of go, okay, you know, I'm accepting the risk. And I mean, you know, I think one of the things with that is like, you know, his choice was to either just cave into the fear or keep doing what he loved to do.
Right.
So he had to overcome his fear.
Well, do you think we can control our fear? Because I mean, Belinda seemed to think that controlling your fear, like you could not only overcome it, but then learn to control it.
You know, if you think instinctively the way our brains are hardwired, if we look at it from a neurological perspective, then, you know, our brains, they try to find an equilibrium. You know, they try to find a balance between excitement, you know, caused by fear, for example, and then that sense of control over the situation. So, you know, if you perceive a situation as too real, for example, so an extreme fear response, then, you know, the reality is it's very difficult to overcome that kind of that sense of control over the situation, because our response is not modulated by, you know, that cortical brain, that thinking brain. So in answer to your question, it's trained. You know, it's a learned response, and it moves us away from that state of anxiety. So, you know, the abnormal levels of fear and anxiety can, you know, they can lead to distress and dysfunction. But you can also train the mind and body so that, you know, that cognitive brain allows us to feel more at ease, for want of better terminology, more at ease. So it comes from a biological response. You know, the brain needs to protect us, you know, from being eaten by wild animals, you know, from the fear of perhaps being in a car accident or attacked by someone. So there's a regular response that's important, and we can't suppress that in any way. But also as well, abnormal levels of fear and anxiety and not channeling them can lead to, you know, that distress and that dysfunction. And they can also limit a person's ability to succeed and experience that joy and happiness in life. But if we understand it, then we have more way of controlling it and our actual fear response. If we understand it, we absolutely can control it, which is why I climb big mountains and do some pretty scary adventures, because I've learned to control it now, not be in fear of fear.
So I don't know if we ever overcome our fear 100%. That's me. You know, I don't know if I think we could get to the point where we're more comfortable with the fear and we've sort of accepted that there's risk, like I was saying. But I think there's always that point, you know, deep in the back of your mind that, you know, whatever, there are more sharks in the ocean, or you could get hurt doing the thing you love. But I think the will to do whatever that is, like if your passion is surfing, the will puts you past the fear. But I think in the back of your mind, there's always that, like I guarantee you every time Shannon steps in the water, there's probably a thought about, there's sharks in here, like whether it's subconscious or conscious, it's just the way it is. So I think you could overcome your fear, but I don't think the fear totally disappears.
Right. I mean, I don't know about controlling it either. Like, I guess you could, right? And I see Belinda's point. I do. But at the same time, I don't know if that would work for me, right? I mean, I don't know.
I think it's just one of those things where I think you, like anything, you learn to control the emotions around it, and the more successes you have, the more
you build the confidence in yourself. Right.
It's like ocean waves, right? When you're at the shoreline, so when something happens at first, you're at the shoreline and you're getting bombarded by waves, right? Boom, boom, boom. They seem really quick. But the further out you get into the ocean, there's a wave, and then it gets a little longer between the next one, and then you get a little further out, and they're even further apart. And I think it becomes one of those things where as you train yourself, right, you're in there longer, you're going deeper into whatever that fear is. What happens is there's always that fear, but and the waves just aren't as close together, right? So the fear doesn't pop up all the time. It's like more spread out. Yeah, like grief. Yeah, that's the exact example people use with grief all the time, the ocean and the waves. And it's sort of the same concept. But I think anything traumatic, right? Like think about that. Anything traumatic that happens in your life, or, if you're afraid of whatever it is, it's traumatic to some degree, right? And I think anything traumatic, it's sort of that same concept. You need to have time, you need to have experience with it, and you need to get over it. That's why I think like part of the, and I keep saying the tactical piece, just maybe because of my background, but that tactical piece of how you approach things becomes so important.
The bottom line is everyone's just trying to survive. Like some people that are more extreme with their fear, right? And I mean, we're not finding ourselves up against sharks and mountains, in our day-to-day life, but that doesn't mean that our threats aren't real to us in the day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank God that we evolved, right? And that the best part is that we'll continue to evolve to face like the new threats, right? I mean, the saber-toothed tiger is not our threat today, but I mean, I wonder how our brain is going to evolve to combat some of like the modern day threats that we're, up against. So
I think we'll still have that core instinct. Like it doesn't seem like that part of our brain, it hasn't gone away yet. So it's not going to go away, even in the, far future, unless we start creating like some medical processes that removes it, or we start, whatever DNA, modifying genes to remove that animalistic part. But here's the thing. It's honestly, it's something that's worked for the human beings since we've been around, and for other creatures. And it's probably something we really need. That's why it stays there, right? That's why, you keep talking about evolution. That's why the people who are still here have those senses and have that part of their brain working.
Well, just be happy you survived today. How about that?
I'm happy every day I survive getting my daughters to school and back.
Almost every day to a certain degree, just cycling from back home here, taking the girls to school when it's a rush hour. I'm just happy I survived.